Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tazinkowicz as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Well, hello and welcome back to episode 11 of Boosting Business Value. We're up in the double digits, which is super exciting. Today, we're going to be talking about coordinating your three teams. If you remember, our last three episodes, we're talking about the three essential teams to running a business. They're not the only teams, but they're the teams you can't live without. And those are your exit planning and life after ownership team, your advisory team, and the executive team within the business. So today, what we want to do is we want to talk about how do you coordinate those teams? How do you maximize the benefit once you've filled all of those team seats with the right people? How do you get the most out of them to drive your business and everyone within the business forward? We're going to talk about information that needs to be bridged across the three teams. We'll discuss how to bridge that information and then disseminate out to other stakeholders, and when to disseminate beyond those three teams. And then finally, we'll really dig into something that's super critical. We touched on it in all three of the last episodes, but we're going to drive home why having a third-party facilitator is so important when you're trying to maximize the value of your three teams. So for those of you who are just joining us for the very first time, welcome. We're excited to have you listening or watching on video. I'm Jason Tazinkowicz, the Chief Operations Officer of Blue Sky Business Resources, and my trusty companion and colleague and mentor is co-host Dr. David Gruder, Blue Sky's business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist. I'm going to take a breath. Dr. G, take it away.
Okay. Well, we're going to dive into first is three big challenges in coordinating your three core teams. And Jason, you've already mentioned what those three core teams are, so I don't think I need to repeat that here. So why don't you take it away in terms of just stating what those three big challenges are that we're about to unpack?
Cool. So the first challenge is somewhat of a new one. It's flourishing in this age of hyper transparency and hyper connectivity. The second challenge we'll discuss is how to optimize the participation within the team of the individual members so that you get the most out of having the right people in those seats, and then avoiding the meeting suck trap, or making meetings that are valuable and impactful and worthwhile.
Yeah. And we're going to do that in a short period of time. We're going to cover all of this territory. So
I have a small cup today, so we got to keep it brief.
Okay. So first challenge is in this age of hyper-transparency, expectations, deciding what information needs to be shared across your three teams and the rest of your organization. So first of all, what's propelled us into this age of hyper-transparency? And what's propelled us into this age is the cumulative detrimental impacts of opacity. So opacity, or being opaque, is the opposite of transparency. And what's really propelled us into hyper-transparency is that the younger generations will tolerate nothing short of transparency. In the presence of opacity, they'll bail. They leave. Or if they stay in profoundly disengaged ways that don't do anybody any good, don't do them any good, and certainly that don't do the company any good. So we're in an age of hyper-transparency, whether we want to be or not. And my bias is that this is a good thing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, the other thing that's really precipitated this is, access, because these younger generations are growing up with so much unbelievable information and access at their fingertips. it's become an expectation in a way that, when I was a kid, I had to go work for information. I had to go to a library or find an expert. I had to do some research and really work to gain information. So information was a little bit more coveted. And now, because of all of that access, I think that it's become more of an expectation. And, I'm on your side, doctor. I think that transparency is never a bad thing.
No, appropriate transparency, properly timed transparency. And we're going to unpack that as we go through the solution to mastering the art of appropriate hyper transparency. The one thing I'll add at the front end, while we're just unpacking what these challenges are, is there's an old saying from psychological circles, and in particularly recovery circles, 12-step circles, we're only as sick as our secrets. Well, so are companies only as sick as their secrets.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
in a couple of minutes, after we unpack what these 3 challenges are, we're going to unpack what to do about them, solutions to these challenges. So that's the first challenge, is hypertransparency and how to master the art of appropriate hypertransparency. What's the second challenge, Jason?
Challenge number 2, ensuring that every team member represents the necessary wisdom of their role and not representing their own ego and self. We spent a lot of time in the last few episodes talking about how titles and positions and seats on a team exist to fulfill specific needs. We don't build a team just for fun or for somebody to play poker with. That's a different thing. Business teams, every single member has a cohort or a key piece of wisdom or knowledge that individual is the steward of, and making sure that as you're working together as a team, that we're working as a team of stewards and not a team of, self-propelling and promoting individuals is really important.
Mm-hmm. Really important. Well said. And so the third challenge we're going to unpack solutions to is the challenge that everyone is familiar with, which is dreading meetings. And people don't dread meetings, in my experience, because they dread meetings. What they dread is the uselessness of meetings. In my experience, what I have found is that when meetings are truly useful, purposeful, forward-moving, empowering, motivating, et cetera, that people actually look forward to them, as long as the meetings aren't happening so frequently that they can't get their work done. So challenge number 3 that we're going to unpack for you is how to get out of the meetings suck trap.
Awesome. I'm excited. I think everybody can relate to those valueless meetings and, the stress of having so many demands on your time and then sitting in a room away from, your hyper-connected self and having your time wasted. So I'm excited about that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's just go straight into, I think people can relate to what these challenges are. I think they're pretty clear and straightforward. So let's go straight forward into solving these challenges and giving tools and ideas and concepts to master them. And, I'll kick it off with this whole art of appropriate hypertransparency. And, one of the things that I always like to say is, if I'm afraid of somebody knowing something about me, then I'm probably doing something wrong in that. And so, first and foremost, the idea that if you're acting in a transparent way, if you're behaving with an expectation of transparency, you're almost forcing yourself to make better decisions. And so I think that mindset of transparency is a great mindset to have. But there's an other side of the coin, right? There is some information that just isn't safe or appropriate to share. And so, the 2 things that are at the heart, in my perspective, of mastering appropriate hypertransparency, once you're in a transparent mindset, are time and that word appropriate. Understanding what things, if made fully transparent, could put individuals or the organization at risk, and when is it appropriate to share information? I think we've all had one of those friends that whatever comes up comes out, and they just share everything fully transparently, and it gets them into a lot of trouble. And so, thinking about that. And I think that the key takeaway in being successful with hypertransparency is understanding first and foremost what can and cannot be shared. And, I know I've said it a couple times, but understanding the only things that should not ever be made hyper transparent are the things that put the organization or individuals at risk.
Mm-hmm. Or into inappropriate anxiety, meaning
Yes.
activate anxiety in them when it's premature because they're not yet empowered to do something about the anxiety. They just sit in the not knowing because the information has been shared prematurely. And so to underscore what you were just saying, a step even further, you and I, Jason, both believe that in today's world, because transparency is so important, it's now more important than ever to identify what can't be shared than what can and should be shared, because basically anything that can and should be shared should be shared. So the clarity that's necessary is clarity about what's not appropriate to share, perhaps at all, or perhaps with specific people, or at a specific time. So there's such a thing as information that is really crucial to be transparent about, but not today. So for example, if you're an owner and you're thinking about selling your company, you're thinking that you want to sell your company, or you're thinking that the time is approaching when you want to ramp up into that, but you haven't yet really come to clarity about that and choice making and commitment around that, and you don't yet have a plan for how to do that in a way that is going to be honorable to your company's culture, to your personnel, then yes, of course, you're going to have to share that information that you want to sell the company. But if you don't have the clarity I was just describing, the time hasn't arrived yet to have that conversation with your personnel, but the time has come to have that conversation with your trusted advisors team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to just put a fine point on that, if the information will cause more questions than you have answers to, then it's probably not ready to be shared unless you are exploring. If you're in an exploratory phase, having those questions and working together to form an answer is great. But if you're in a critical decision, like your example of a business owner wanting to retire and exit their business, that's a critical piece of information that will cause a lot of fear and consternation in the hearts and minds of all the stakeholders of the organization. And if you can't put their hearts and minds at ease with answers, then you're not ready to share that information.
Mm-hmm. And what I think is relevant to spend a moment on, having to do with this whole question of transparency, is the difference between secrets and confidentiality. So confidentiality is something that one person shares with another in trust, that it's going to remain private, not because of secret keeping, but because the clarity is not yet in place, or the timing is not yet in place. The timing hasn't yet arrived, so that sharing that information would be helpful rather than harmful. Whereas secrecy, in contrast to confidentiality, is always about having power over other people. It's always about manipulation and power control. Confidentiality is not about manipulation and power control. It's about wisdom, but secrecy is dysfunctional.
Yep, absolutely. And, I think that all the business owners that listen to this and all the trusted advisors and probably everybody that listens to this podcast has their own confidentiality agreement and has signed multiple NDAs or confidentiality agreements in the course of their professional life. Those are there, again, going back to that protecting an individual or an organization from risk. And, one of the ways, another example of both confidentiality and timing are, what we go through in an M&A process. We'll tell business owners very early on when we're talking about running an M&A transaction process, especially on the sell side, we'll say, here's a list of all this confidential and sensitive information that you're going to need to turn over before the transaction closes. However, here's the process and the timing and the staging by which we share that information. We'll share financial information, income statements, and balance sheets very early on, but we won't share client information until we're in due diligence, until we've gone exclusive with one buyer that we feel comfortable with. And then we won't share employee information or sensitive, like key blue star clients that could be stolen until we're already comfortable with the purchase agreement. And we know that, barring something unforeseen and consequential, this transaction is going to close. The closer we get to close and the more of the pieces that are in place, the easier it is for us to share very sensitive, employee information with a buyer without putting the organization at risk of having this just be a tire kicker who's trying to poach technically skilled staff.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And the thing I want to emphasize about this is that as a business owner or as an executive, if you're not sure, if you're not really, really clear inside yourself about whether a piece of information should or shouldn't be shared, should or shouldn't be shared at this time, should or shouldn't be shared with this person versus that person, that's who your advisors are for. Talk to your trusted advisors. Check with them, run that past them so that you take the burden off of yourself for having to always know what's appropriate to share with whom when. If you know that, you know that. Cool, great. But if you have questions about that, then that's what you have your advisors for. Don't underutilize them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just give one more example, a financial example of something that gets into that gray space, because this really is an important concept. And there are a lot of different facets and angles and areas where this hyper transparency can become really in question. And so, one of the things when I started working, wage was a don't ask, don't tell element, right?
Yeah.
And you never really knew. And there was a lot of wage disparity, even within core positional groups in organizations. And it really all came down to how well a prospective employee could negotiate and, almost buyer beware. And that lack of transparency of wages was a protection against the business owner or the hiring manager, because they're squeezing some employees that are being paid less than they deserve, while other employees are being paid more than they deserve, but they're all being expected to perform at the same level. That's unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. It's an engagement killer and a productivity killer and a collaboration killer and a culture killer.
Exactly. However, telling everybody what everybody else makes is too far in the other direction, right? Full and complete transparency of what individuals make creates an unhealthy form of competitiveness. And so this is one of those areas where both ends of the spectrum are unhealthy for similar but different reasons. However, having a very transparent wage structure where you say each of these positions, these are the ranges that we will pay. And these are the criterion, the key metrics that are used to determine one, promotion and advancement, but two, where somebody falls within that scale. That type of performance-based transparency is extremely healthy. It will protect against the side of the spectrum where some employees are being squeezed and others are being overpaid. And it will protect against having that unhealthy competition of full wage transparency. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about navigating hyper transparency is how do you get to a healthy point of clarity so that everybody can understand how to perform well and succeed within an environment without creating a sense of so much information that it's unhealthy for the culture.
Absolutely. And really what you're talking about so eloquently is the transparency Goldilocks zone.
Yes, my porridge is perfect.
Yay. Cool. Shall we go on to challenge number 2?
Please do.
All right. So the second challenge is ensuring that every team member represents necessary wisdom, not their own ego. And what that really refers to is that each person on your team is on your team or should be on your team because they look at your business through a necessary and important lens that you need to benefit from in your decision making. And they generally don't see the whole picture. They don't see all of the lenses that need to be looked through in order to make prudent decisions. That process of prudent decision making gets to occur when all of your team members, all of your experts, all of your executives or advisors, et cetera, have weighed in with their perspective, with the lens that they are there in order to offer, so that you're combining the wisdom of all lenses. But in order for that to work, you need to be sure that the people that are on your teams are operating through their wisdom, through the genius of their particular expertise areas, not from a place of territorial, siloed, protective egotism.
I like that.
So recognize who you get information from when you're in an ideation or preparation phase. It's important to identify who those people are. So if you're in ideation and preparation, you're essentially pre-strategy. So you're not likely to be talking to your tacticians at that phase, because that's not their lens. You want to talk to the visionaries that are on your team. You want to talk to the strategists who are high level enough in their strategic thinking to span the gap between visionary and strategy. So recognize who you get information from during ideation and preparation. Recognize whose needs you're the steward of as decisions are being made. In other words, each of your team members, in order to not operate from ego, they need to have clarity about what they are the voice for. So your chief financial officer should be the voice for stability, and your chief R&D person, for example, should be the voice for innovation. Your chief financial officer should not be the voice for innovation. It's not their wheelhouse. They're all about stability. The R&D person is all about transformation and magic. So recognize whose needs each of your team members are the stewards of as decisions are being made, and recognize who you're responsible for disseminating information to, and recognize what you need to be clear about before leaving a meeting and disseminating that information. And that's not just on your shoulders as the owner or the CEO. That's on the shoulders of every team member that's participating in a particular meeting.
Yeah, well said, my friend. That's a lot to take in, but it's really important stuff. And, one of the things that you'll notice as your team gets better at, recognizing the charge of their stewardship and acting as that advocate and steward for their charge, instead of acting as individual leaders, is that it makes decision-making so much more clear. Because even if you have leaders on your team who are of a personality where they like to have the last word and they like to win, it will be easier for the team to say, okay, really appreciate your input. We've taken it. We understand it. But this particular decision is the responsibility of this leader over here. And so we're going to take everybody's feedback and input, but ultimately this steward is responsible for the decision, because it's their charge that will be directly impacted by this. And so knowing that helps balance that decision-making piece. And also, I just wanted to touch on, your ideation example is fantastic, but prior to ideation, talking to the tacticians and finding out what's broken, what's not working as they tactically implement, is how we get to what we're going to ideate about. And so, everybody gets a voice, but everybody gets a voice in the right time, in the right place. And, I love the way that you broke that down, because this really clarifies, the difference between a group of individual leaders and a fully functioning team.
I'm really glad you brought that in. And the one last thing I want to say about this before I'm ready, at least, to move on to challenge number 3 is the interplay, the balance between having lens clarity, being clear about what you're able to see through the lens you look through as a team member versus the humility that says, I know I don't see the whole picture because that's not my purview. I'm not supposed to see the whole picture all by myself. I will come to clarity about the whole picture as I listen to the input that everyone else offers through the lens that they're on the team in order to provide clarity about. So it's that combination, it's that beautiful alchemy between the confidence that we have about the lens we look through and the value we can provide through that lens, combined with the humility that says, I know I don't see the whole picture all by myself. It's that mindset that when everyone on a team is operating from that mindset, magic happens.
I love it. That's perfect. What a great way to close out the success steps to that challenge. And so now we'll walk into everybody's favorite, the meeting suck trap. So, I think that there are a lot of things that go into determining whether a meeting is going to be good or a waste of time. And there are a lot of really bad, simple, easy traps that we all fall into that cause us, even if we're well-intentioned, to leave bad meetings. And, the very first thing is how well prepared are we? If you go into a meeting thinking, well, I'll get to the meeting, I'll read the agenda and I'll wing it, the meeting's not going to be valuable. And a lot of the preparation comes into the perspective. If you don't trust your team, if you don't trust the concept of a meeting, if you feel like you have important things to do and you're being forced to go to a meeting, you're not going to be in a good headspace to be prepared or to bring your best self. However, if you look at meetings as what they are, which is a pause to regroup, refocus, and make meaningful steps toward progress, then you can start to get excited about meetings, because it's like, I've been head down for so long, churning away at my specific area of focus. I relish the break to step back, lift my head, and get perspective from everybody else around me. And I can go back to my work, refreshed, refocused, and ready. Not only that, I might have a chance to share some of the successes or struggles my particular group, the charge of my stewardship, if you will, are facing, and get more input, get more feedback, and get help. And so if you're thinking about meetings in the right way as a positive pause to refocus, recharge, and make meaningful progress towards success, then it makes sense that you would be excited about the meeting. You would take the time to understand what the objectives of the meeting are and to come prepared to achieve those objectives. So it starts with preparation, understanding the purpose and the structure of the meeting, and doing your own diligence to come and contribute. And then execute.
And as you were saying, and I want to underline this also, in addition to purpose and structure, mindset, coming in with the useful mindset for a meeting.
Yeah. I've never seen a person come into a meeting saying, this meeting is going to suck, it's a waste of my time, and then witness that person transform and contribute. It just doesn't happen. So yeah, that's all very, very important. Thank you for underlining that. And then we go into how do you execute against objectives and deliverables versus ticking off boxes of an agenda. And if you start running your meetings in that way, the meeting will naturally conclude when your objectives and deliverables have been satisfied. You don't have to we have an hour on the calendar, but we got done in 45 minutes. Great. We just got 15 minutes of our lives back, right? So, understanding that if you're not only that, everybody will walk away with the feeling that something was accomplished.
Yes.
They knew what they came to the meeting to do. The meeting ended. When that was done, we can all walk away saying, okay, that was worth it. And then finally, I guess not finally, there's 2 more points.
Well, before we go on to the next one, what I'll add about that is I'm just going to be totally blunt. Dump your agendas. Agendas are the enemy of productive meetings. replace them with objectives and deliverables. So when I say dump agendas, I'm not saying now make meetings even more chaotic. But the problem with an agenda versus a deliverable is agendas are invitations for ceaseless yammering, for conversations, debates that go on without end because nobody has clarity and is on the same page about what the outcome is that's being sought from the thing that's being discussed. So agendas are the enemy of meetings. Dump them.
Yeah. And a bad agenda can distract completely from what you're trying to achieve. So I completely agree. So thank you for jumping in on that.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing is, as you're working towards these objectives and deliverables, we want to talk about the outcomes, and we always want to close the meeting with, okay, these were the objectives and deliverables. These are the outcomes. And who's in charge of that, so that before we walk away from that meeting, we know that the leader, the facilitator, the person and group that are accountable to execute on those objectives and deliverables that were decided upon are capable. Capable doesn't just mean skill set. It means skills, resources, and bandwidth. And so making sure that everybody understands what's expected to implement those objectives and deliverables, and we all agree that the accountable party is capable is crucial to making sure that, okay, we planned ahead, great. We had a good meeting, we made decisions, and we were efficient with our time, fantastic. But now it's, did progress get made after the meeting was adjourned? And that's where the outcomes come in. And then finally, the implementation piece. And we talked at length about the difference between the S suite, the strategic and the big picture leaders, and the T suite, the tactical people that then go and make things happen day in and day out. And understanding that as you're implementing, those two suites still have to communicate with one another, right? We always find out from the tacticians what's broken, right? And what opportunities exist. And then the strategic team is working on, how do we make an umbrella that overcomes those struggles and maximizes the potential of the opportunities. And so they have to be working in synergy at all times in communication, but they also are a different skill set and a different group of individuals with different accountabilities. So making sure that all of that is understood, that's how the meeting drives progress in the operation.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Okay, so ready to move on to
Yes,
the
sir.
final one. So this has to do with what you were saying early on in this episode, Jason, about the importance of an executive team development consultant. Productive collaborative meetings usually require facilitation by an outside person or an independent person, or someone more specifically whose role it is to facilitate. And the reason for that, why is that important? It's because it's virtually impossible to wear the following two hats at the same time. If I am wearing the hat of being an advocate or a provider of lens clarity, and I'm trying to facilitate a meeting, I am at odds with myself energetically. Advocacy and facilitation are both very important functions. They can't be fulfilled by an individual in the same moment. They can't be fulfilled simultaneously. So someone needs to be the one who is an expert at facilitating flow and process, while everyone else, all of the team members in the meeting, get to be focused on content and voicing their wisdom. So if you've ever tried to wear both of those hats, the facilitation hat and the voicing your wisdom hat at the same time, you know it's just not viable. So make peace with that and make sure you've got a really expert facilitator to do the facilitation, who's got no dog in the hunt, who isn't invested in a particular solution or outcome or decision, but who is invested in making sure that the way things are talked about lead to whatever the best decision or outcome is going to turn out to be.
Absolutely. Said another way, we just talked about every member on the team is a steward of a group of knowledge or a group of people, and they have to be focused on that during a meeting. So we need somebody whose stewardship is making sure that all the voices that are appropriate are heard and that there is clarity before decision making. And yeah, I mean, it's so important. And I think we've all been there, but I can tell you personally that I've led meetings where I also am responsible for advocating for a party in the meeting, and it's a nightmare. Typically those are meetings that run way too long. Those are meetings where there ends up with some misunderstanding or consternation because there's not that person that's clarifying. I get caught up in the weeds of advocating for my responsible party, and I can't then step back and say to Zinkowicz, you're getting too emotionally invested in your advocacy. Take a step back and let somebody else speak, and that's when things go off the rails.
Absolutely. So if you've ever tried to wear both of those hats simultaneously and you failed, it's not because there's something wrong with you or because you're insufficient. It's because it's not possible to wear both hats simultaneously. There's nothing wrong with you.
Well, maybe not because of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. Thank you for that clarity.
I don't know that you can make that statement carte blanche.
You're right. You're right.
Oh,
I think we'd better move to takeaways pretty quickly.
Let's go quick. So, I think the big takeaway for me, and the number one when we were talking about this that popped up in my mind, is that once you've started developing these teams and structuring them and filling the seats the right way with an understanding of stewardship and knowledge and, S-suite versus T-suite and all these things, meetings begin to take on a whole new light regarding vision and accomplishment. And I'm just going to go back to, my perspective of a good meeting is a pause in operation to regroup, refocus, and drive success forward.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And the second takeaway we have for you is about hypertransparency. Hypertransparency requires new skills and up-leveled psychological sophistication that, frankly, most executives haven't been exposed to, which is a whole different story than most executives can't rise to. In my experience, most executives can rise to really skilled hypertransparency, and it requires training. It requires skills and psychological sophistication, as I said. So don't be bashful about seeking that kind of expertise to up-level not only your skills and psychological sophistication around hypertransparency, but to elevate your entire team's skills and psychological sophistication around transparency.
Absolutely. And, we talk about a lot of dark horse subjects, right? We talk a lot about a lot of hard work elements of good leadership that, we don't hear people talking about in normal circles. But I will tell you, and I know you'll agree, that experientially, executives, entrenched executives, long tenured executives get nervous when you start to talk about hypertransparency. But once they wrap their arms around it and start executing in a hypertransparent way, it's a relief. It's like a burden has been lifted. And so, this is one of those dark horse subjects that we'll beat the drum on a lot, but it's largely because it really does improve life for everybody when you can be more comfortable with appropriate hypertransparency. So the next big takeaway is that idea that as a member of a highly functional operational team or advisory team, that you are on that team for a specific reason. You are filling a specific seat and you are the steward of a very clearly defined element of a successful operation, whether that's stewarding knowledge and expertise, stewarding vision, or stewarding a team or division of the organization. And remembering that when you sit down as a leader in a team, you're leaving your ego somewhere else, and you are now a representative of an important subset of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. And so two more takeaways. The first of those two more has to do with meetings. Make sure you end each meeting with accountability capable deliverables. In other words, with clarity about who is on point for delivering certain outcomes that have been agreed upon during that meeting? And do they have, are they the one that's going to be accountability capable because they have the skills, they have the resources, and they have the bandwidth to get it done, so that everyone walks out of the meeting with their own accountability capable deliverables relevant to their area of expertise, their area of focus in the company.
Absolutely. That's huge. That's the only way that meetings end up driving value. So super important. And finally, I'll hit this drum one more time during this episode, and that is make sure you've got a facilitator. And I've seen some organizations very successfully develop a facilitator within the organization.
Yes.
That has that one core responsibility inside of meetings. But for those who do not have one, even if you want to identify one and develop them, bring in an expert facilitator, a coach, somebody that can take that responsibility. And 9 times out of 10, if it's within your company's charter to bring that internal, that person can help train your internal advocate, but there needs to be somebody at that meeting facilitating the meeting. And that needs to be their only responsibility within the meeting.
Indeed, indeed. Any other final comments before I wrap this up for us?
I think we've done it.
I think we have. I think we unpacked a whole lot in a short time.
It's like Christmas.
So, the gifts just keep on coming.
That's right.
So on behalf of Jason Tuzinkowicz and myself, we thank you once again for listening to this episode. And we really do look forward to reading your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and other requests in the comments section. So please make use of that, because we really look at those things and we take them seriously, and we want to be of service to you. So we, in addition, want to re-invite you, if you haven't already done this, to click the subscribe buttons so that you're notified immediately whenever we release a next future episode.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all and have a great day.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.